This is Heal Your Mind, Heal Your Body with Dr. Schuyler. Discover how your thoughts manifest disease and what you can do about it. Here's your host, Dr. Schuyler.
Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back. So we're going over something quite interesting today that I know millions of people suffer from, and it's this unexplainable bloat. This unexplainable distended belly, to the point sometimes where if you're a female, it may even look like you're pregnant, or your skin may be so stretched out that it actually hurts when you get this bloated. But there's no medical reason for this bloat. It's really unexplained and it can be quite painful. So this can be called a cortisol bloat. So if there's no medical known reason for it, cortisol bloat. It also can show up as a moon face. This really swollen, puffy face that looks very rounded and dimply is a cortisol moon face. So this unexplained bloating can happen with or without gas. So how does stress truly affect us? And we hear the term, I'm so stressed out. This is so stressful. We are so inundated with this concept of stress. It's become almost mundane to hear it. I'm really actually kind of overhearing, I'm so stressed, because it's not really qualifying what exactly is happening when we're so stressed. Again, so stressed. So this episode's really going to break down what exactly does that mean when it comes to the mind-body connection and how much it affects us to something that is so common to so many people, and it's the stress bloat. What's so fascinating about this is I can look back, we've got in my house the Mother's Day gift where the digital images come streaming by and they're just kind of this autoplay. And I was sitting there literally as I was writing this podcast, and I'm just kind of, dazing out the window and gazing at this picture frame and enjoying the memories. And literally, I started to notice the phases of my life when I was having stress. And I could literally tell just by the shape of my face how it corresponded and correlated to really troublesome, stressful times in my life. And I have known I've been prone to the moon face and to this unexplained, bloated belly, which is just a cortisol bloat. And it's so funny looking back at these videos and these pictures going, wow, yeah, that tracks. And if you've listened to this podcast long enough, I like to tie in some sort of story, to make this, which we're going to get into some pretty hardcore science, but, to make this science a little more applicable. And I'm so comfortable doing, self-degrading stories because heck, why not? I was looking back at the old photos and just thinking about all the times I can correlate times in my life with it. And there's just one coworker I had back in the day, and every time I was around this human, my belly would just completely distend. I'm talking, it looked like I was maybe 6-7 months pregnant. I'm not over exaggerating. And I kept thinking maybe it's hormonal. And so I'm doing all the tricks, the lemon water, even, contemplated, doing hormone therapy, and I was looking at cold water and earthing, and, I was doing infrared saunas, and every tool that I teach everyone, I was working at myself. And the only time that this distended belly happened was at the presence of this coworker. I remember coming one time back from massage and running into this coworker, and instantly I'm super relaxed. My body's in homeostasis. Everything's great. And boop, pop, this cortisol bloat happens. And I'm like, wow, okay. So it was happening so often, I named this cortisol bloat TRIP. And I'll explain later, tryptophan. We'll get into the science of it later, the cortisol bloat. And I like to do this little thing where I send parts of my body love to help them with optimal performance. So I'm like, Trip, it's okay. Like, we'll figure this out. I would always send love and compassion to my body to help bring it back to homeostasis, rather than I learned years ago, rather than getting mad at your body, it's, let's understand what's happening with my body. Let me, Trip, what's going on, honey? Like, we'll find out what's wrong with you, and just really kind of get to understand and accept what's happening with the mind-body connection. So I'm just kind of laughing about it, but I'm really uncomfortable whenever I'm around this person. My stomach would just pop out, and this person was so friendly and brilliant and smart and funny, but something underneath just felt uncomfortable, but I could never pinpoint why. And the rumor around the office and the hospital and the OR was this person had a very, sharp temper. They were quick to really fire off, and they were cut and runners. But I'd never seen this side of the coworker, so I was just like, I'm not worried about it. I'm a peaceful person. I thought, surely not me. Like, this won't happen to me. Like, of course, not me. That's like the funniest line ever. So I ignored my intuition. I ignored my gut. And I look back now and I'm like, okay, what was the psychology behind it? I was fearful of losing this person's, professional respect. I wanted to make this professional relationship work. I wanted this person to respect my work. I respected their work. I wanted to please the other person. That was important to me, that, this colleague sees me in this respectful eyes. So I had this attachment style, this anxious attachment style of fear of not being respected, fear of maybe losing this relationship, which I felt was very, professionally beneficial. But as I started to get to know this colleague, as their reputation preceded them, I began to realize that their values and their integrity was not aligned with mine whatsoever. And, I always talk about biometrics don't lie. My gut was telling me that subconsciously something is wrong. Like, literally, I would see this person and boop, bop, the belly would go out. So when we talked about previous episodes about neuroception, our mind within milliseconds detects things like biometrics, stress contagions, things that our conscious mind hasn't quite caught up to. So my subconscious mind, the biometrics were saying, hey, it's not good to be around this person. So when I gently began to remove myself from this professional relationship, this professional environment, instantly, and I'm not even over exaggerating, the bloat belly went away. And it was as if the body was like, okay, thank you. That was the one area in your life that was causing stress, and we had to get you to eliminate it. So when we start really diving into this in this episode, the science of this bloat belly, and we're going to kind of get into the deep of it, your body will tell you something is wrong before your mind can differentiate it. And we've talked about episodes about people pleasing, attachment styles. So as we're getting into the impact of stress as it relates to GI disorders, keep in mind the previous episodes about attachment style, chronic invalidation, secondary gains. So cortisol bloat is often referred to as stress bloat, and it's characterized by abdominal distension and discomfort. And this connection between cortisol and GI symptoms, it involves, several mechanisms. So exactly how is cortisol related to digestive issues? And it's linked to a lot of things like irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease, colitis, bloating, gas, abdominal pain, dyspepsia. Previous episodes, we talked about dyspepsia with Dr. Safter, and even as well as ulcers in the stomach and the intestines. So when we talked about previous episodes, and you're welcome to, if you look at the workbook too, that happens to be online, it will help you follow along with it better as well. But when you break down the science of it, you break down the emotions, break down the automatic negative thoughts, stress and stress contagion, the limbic system. So all these components create what we use the word stress, and the word is so overused. All stress is a disruption of homeostasis. So let's break down this cortisol hormone and its impact on the GI system and the gut-brain axis. So cortisol is the key component to the body's stress response, and it orchestrates something called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or the HPA. And we're going to get into what the HPA is in a minute. So chronic stress leads to this really high sustained levels of cortisol, which disrupts the gut-brain axis disorder. which is orchestrated by the HPA. So this neurotransmitter imbalance, this high cortisol levels, alters the production of functioning neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, which play a crucial role in gut motility, and cortisol's impact on serotonin. And what's fascinating about serotonin is 95% of serotonin, which is responsible for happy hormones, it's produced in the gut. So happy hormones are produced in the gut, not the brain. And cortisol impacts how serotonin is produced. So when you look at the primary stress hormone, you look at cortisol, it has these far-reaching effects on various bodily functions in the GI symptoms, and primarily the function of serotonin. So the role of serotonin as a neurotransmitter regulates mood, digestion, and many other GI functions. So serotonin regulates bowel movements and motility, and it also influences the gut to brain access. So it communicates up to the brain, affecting mood and overall mental health. So when you look at this, your serotonin is communicating from your gut up to your brain, and it's impacting your mood. It's impacting how you feel for the day. So when we have this cortisol response in the hypothalamic pituitary adrenals, the HPA is activated. So this is leading to a release of cortisol from the adrenal glands. So this release of cortisol has this impact on something called tryptophan. Think back to, what do I call my little bloated belly back in the day? It was called little tryptophan. So cortisol affects this amino acid, and this amino acid, TPH for short, has an enzyme in it. Enzyme TPH is responsible for converting tryptophan to serotonin. So chronic stress can reduce this enzyme that's responsible for lowering serotonin levels in the gut. Remember, 95% of our hormones that are happy come from our gut. So under chronic stress, this tryptophan, how it metabolizes, it is then diverted into different directions. Rather than working on converting to serotonin, it's diverted different areas. So thereby it's reducing how our gut can produce and synthesize serotonin. Not only is it impacting serotonin, but it's also impacting the inflammation, and more specifically, the inflammatory response called cytokines. The cytokines within the gut alter tryptophan and alter serotonin production, exacerbating the imbalance between serotonin and stress. Cytokines can further alter tryptophan metabolism and the serotonin production, thereby exacerbating the imbalance even more. So cytokines are signaling proteins, and they're used to help control inflammation throughout your entire body. So if you think down to the gut, now the gut is at this imbalance of these cytokines. And cytokines allow your immune system to mount this great defense if germs or other substances that are in your body that can make you sick. So too many cytokines can lead to this excessive inflammation and conditions like autoimmune. And that's actually going to be the next episode, how these cytokines cause autoimmune disorders. So as it relates to the GI, the cytokines have this stress-induced cortisol release that relate to this production of pro-inflammatory cytokines. The cytokines interfere with serotonin synthesis and release, even further lowering serotonin. So we're looking at all these different ways that stress, cortisol, is impacting our serotonin levels in our gut. That results in is this gut microbiome disruption, the happy bacteria within our gut, the microbiome. This leads to dysbiosis. This healthy gut microbiome is critical for optimal functioning of serotonin. And this gut microbiome dysbiosis, this breakdown in the gut microbiome, results in something called leaky gut. It's a condition that's harmful when these substances from the gut enter the bloodstream, triggering an immune response, further disrupting the serotonin production. And think of leaky gut as eczema or psoriasis. So when we look at how the gut is then being destroyed from stress and anxiety, the brain is communicating these stress hormones down to the gut. The gut is then releasing these inflammatory markers, and now we've got IBS. IBS is a dysregulation of serotonin in the gut. Chronic stress and elevated cortisol levels can exacerbate IBS symptoms through reduced serotonin production. Also, inflammatory bowel disease, IBD. It's a similar mechanisms, and it may worsen conditions like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, where inflammation, serotonin dysregulation play critical roles. All of this goes right back up to mental health and mood disorders. Given the gut-brain axis, reduced serotonin levels in the gut influence your central nervous system, and this contributes to depression and anxiety. This also has an impact on your cognitive functions. Cortisol, chronic stress, lower serotonin, which impact cognitive functioning, also disrupt memory and learning, brain fog. Gut microbiome disturbances, inflammation in the gut cause brain fog. There's an interplay between cortisol, inflammation, and immune dysregulation, increasing the risk of autoimmune disorders. And that's actually going to be the next episode. When you look at the impact of cortisol on the serotonin in the body, in the gut, cortisol slows down gut motility. Think of gastroparesis. Delayed gastric emptying and increased gas retention. Cortisol bloat, trip, which contributes to stored stress. And think about, I've talked about this so much, about anything below the diaphragm is a fight or frozen response. So think about this. Gut motility is slowed down or even immobilized. When the mind is in limbic, the body is in limbo. The mind is in a frozen or flight response. The body's in the same limbo response. Gastroparesis, slow gut motility, you're in a frozen response. IBS is a cortisol dysregulation, where stress is exacerbated by bloating, abdominal pain, altered bowel habits, diarrhea, constipation. Think back to the limbic response, flight response, run, avoid. Gut motility is impacted by what limbic response you're in. It also affects fluid retention. And this is, kind of a fascinating thing. It's an episode all of itself, actually. But when you have elevated cortisol, it influences the production of hormone that causes the kidneys to retain sodium and water, leading to fluid retention. And yes, prolonged exposure to physiological stress can increase your chance of kidney stones. So when we look at how cortisol bloat creates disease, chronic inflammation is another way. Look at systemic inflammation, and that is this persistent high cortisol levels that contribute to chronic systemic, that means throughout the whole body, inflammation. This inflammation can negatively impact your cardiovascular. We even talked about before, broken heart syndrome, dysregulated heartbeat, your immune system, autoimmune diseases, inflammatory responses, and your GI tract. So when we look at chronic inflammation in the gut, it leads to conditions like IBS, IBD, and functional GI disorders, disorder of the brain-gut interaction. Cortisol also has this immunosuppressant effect to it as well. And it's really beneficial in these short-term stress responses, like you're in the forest and you come across a bear and you have this short response, either fight or flight. But this chronic elevation, it weakens the immune system. So the body becomes more susceptible to infections. And think about it. You're running from the tiger, you're running from the bear. Your body is not focused on healing that paper cut that you got in the office earlier that day on your pinky. it's putting that on the back burner, and it's going to really focus on getting you away from that danger. So when we're in a chronic cortisol response, the immune system kind of dips out of the picture. They're like, take care. We're gonna take a nap here while you're fighting off this bear or this tiger. It also plays a role in metabolic dysregulation. Think of type 2 diabetes. Chronic cortisol is linked to insulin resistance. And we all know this one, weight gain. It produces a fat accumulation, especially around the abdomen area. Now, this is different than the cortisol bloat, not necessarily fat gain, but it's just this instant dysregulation in the system where your stomach pops out and then goes away later. And we do know it's linked to anxiety and depression, this bi-directional relationship between gut health and mental health. That chronic bloating and GI distress even are more contributory factors. So having the chronic bloating, having the chronic GI stress causes more depression. It even causes more anxiety. I'm scared to go out. What if I get sick when I'm out? I can't wear this outfit. My pants aren't fitting. I look too bloated. And then you begin to have more of a cortisol response in the body. And it's this vicious cycle where these psychological stressors of having these conditions exacerbates the physical symptoms, and vice versa. The physical symptoms exacerbate the psychological stress. So cortisol bloat is this multifaceted condition that really kind of exemplifies this, beautiful, magnificent, intricate connection between stress, hormone regulation, and GI health. So the mind-body connection, cortisol regulation, and later autoimmune conditions are deeply interlinked, and in particularly through the GI tract. The connection that's just so central to understanding how all this psychological stress can influence a physical health is really this interplay between where science and psychology overlap, and why this cortisol response creates such a havoc in the body and in the mind and in the body. And when you look at it, in episodes previously, I've discussed, if you break this up into two parts, the science of it and the psychology of it, when you look at the science of cortisol, and 80 million people have an autoimmune disorder. GI disorders is the number one sought out doctor's appointment. 80% are women that have autoimmune disorders. Mostly women have these GI disorders as well. And we begin to look at the psychology of it and understanding the stress contagion, the limbic system, the HPA axis, the attachment styles, what I had, the people pleasing my coworker, my colleague, how this can cause these cortisol bloats, these cortisol phase, even if it's acutely or if it's long term. So I'm really hoping by breaking this down into an understandable level of, how do we qualify stress? I'm hoping that this is beginning to qualify what actually quote unquote stress is on the disease process. And I'm hoping this empowers you to begin to understand what are your automatic negative thoughts that are contributing to it versus what can your automatic loving thoughts be. Be mindful of what bad vibes you're catching, even if your biometrics are picking up bad vibes as someone who has low integrity, or their values and ethics and morals don't align with yours, that you keep maybe making excuses, seeing the better in them, but your gut's telling you something's off. Something just might not be right here. And just be mindful also, what can you do to create automatic loving thoughts to adjust your own internal sense of safety, to foster this sense of peace? And what can you do to spread these healing vibes? If you begin to understand them in yourself, you then want to then protect this sense of inner peace. And then hopefully you want to spread the happy vibes. If you want to get more into this and it feels more like you're having a one-on-one session with me, we developed this workbook that you could work with the podcast on this workbook. It's on the website, drschuyler.net, and it gets into science and the psychology, and then gets into the anecdotes of it. I also have an online workshop coming up in October. You'll see that information on the website now too, drschuyler.net. And finally, the book is ready for pre-order. It's coming out October 20th, which is a very special day for me for many, many reasons. So yeah, you can actually now pre-order the book. So the books, I should say. The first one that started was Empower Your Child to Heal, and it's going over these 8 ways to help your child master the interplay between science and psychology. So the first book is Empower Your Child to Heal, and it's giving you tools and tips on how to understand your child's disease process. And the second book is Empower Yourself to Heal, and it's merging science and psychology, and it's 8 ways to master your mind to create wellness and stop disease. So pre-order now. I'm really excited. It's going to be Amazon, Audible, and all those really cool, fun places. But you can get it on the website right now, drskyler.net. And I'm sending you all so many healing, happy, healthy vibes. Abundant blessings, everybody.
Thank you for your time. I feel so grateful you have listened to the end. When we begin to understand how our body manifests stress, trauma, depression, anxiety, and even unexpressed emotions, we then create a space and bandwidth in our minds to begin to heal our bodies. Healing is a decision, and I am grateful for yours. Abundant blessings, Dr. Schuyler.
To learn more about the work Dr. Schuyler is doing, please visit drschuyler.net. That's drskYler.net. And remember to subscribe to this podcast wherever you like to listen.
Produced by Audavita Studios. Connect your voice to the world.